The scent of rain-soaked earth, mingled with the faint, sweet perfume of jasmine from a neighboring garden, hung heavy in the twilight. Amelia traced the condensation on her wineglass, the cool dampness a stark contrast to the familiar ache in her chest. Another Tuesday evening, another half-empty bottle, another silence stretching between her and the meticulously curated photographs on the mantelpiece. She was a woman crafted from routine, from the quiet hum of predictability, and it was a life she had once, perhaps, even cherished. Then he walked into her gallery, a stormfront disguised as a man in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, and with him came an unsettling disruption. His eyes, the color of a restless ocean just before a tempest, swept over her abstract landscapes as if searching for a hidden truth. She remembered the precise moment, the way the light caught the silver in his dark hair, the confident set of his jaw. It was a meeting that overturned her understanding of everything she thought she knew about herself, about love, about the world. He hadn't spoken much that first evening, simply observed, a silent predator in a room full of vibrant art. Yet his presence alone had ignited a spark in the dormant corners of her soul, a flicker of something she hadn't realized was missing until its sudden, undeniable appearance. It was a terrifying, exhilarating sensation, like standing on the edge of a precipice, knowing a single step could send her soaring or plummeting into an abyss. She'd always chosen the safe path, the well-trodden ground. But his gaze, when it finally met hers, held an invitation to a different journey entirely. The invitation wasn't spoken, but rather a silent challenge, a promise of upheaval wrapped in a gaze that saw beyond the careful veneer she presented to the world. It was a gaze that stripped away the layers of polite conversation and artistic pretense, laying bare the vulnerability she so meticulously guarded. She remembered the tremor in her hand as she offered him a glass of wine, the way their fingers brushed, sending a jolt through her that was both startling and strangely familiar. It was as if her body recognized a connection her mind hadn't yet dared to acknowledge. He had taken the glass, his fingers long and elegant, his eyes never leaving hers. "Your work is audacious," he'd said, his voice a low rumble that resonated deep within her chest. It wasn't a compliment, not in the traditional sense, but an observation that carried more weight than any effusive praise. It was an acknowledgement of the raw, untamed spirit she poured onto her canvases, a spirit she usually kept hidden from the world. In that moment, she felt seen, truly seen, for the first time in years. And in being seen, a fear she hadn't known she possessed began to bloom, a fear of what might happen if she allowed this man to truly know her. The gallery, usually a sanctuary of measured quiet, now seemed to hum with an unspoken tension, an echo of his presence even after he had departed. Amelia found herself pacing, her gaze drifting over the very paintings he had observed, seeing them through new eyes. His eyes. Each brushstroke, each vibrant hue, suddenly felt charged with a different meaning, less about the art itself and more about the audacious heart that had dared to create it. She ran a hand along the cool, smooth surface of a marble plinth, her mind replaying his words, that single descriptor, audacious. It was a word that both flattered and unnerved her. It suggested an understanding that went beyond mere aesthetic appreciation, hinting at a deeper perception of her inner world. The fear, initially a faint whisper, grew into a distinct murmur. It was the fear of exposure, of having the carefully constructed walls around her emotional landscape dismantled. Her routine, once a comforting anchor, now felt like a fragile shield, threatening to shatter under the weight of this unexpected intrusion. She had built her life on predictability, on the quiet solace of her art and the rhythmic cadence of her days. This man, with his intense gaze and discerning words, was an anomaly, a disruption to her carefully curated existence. She yearned to understand why his presence had such a profound effect, why a simple observation could unravel years of self-imposed solitude. Yet a part of her, the audacious part he had so keenly identified, also felt a curious pull, an almost dangerous curiosity about where this unraveling might lead. She watched him turn, a slow, deliberate movement, and walk towards the gallery's entrance. His departure left a void, a sudden emptiness in the space that had, moments before, vibrated with his silent intensity. The chime above the door announced his exit, a final sharp sound that echoed in the sudden quiet. Amelia remained rooted to the spot, her gaze fixed on the now empty doorway, a strange mixture of relief and disappointment warring within her. The afternoon light, once warm and inviting, now seemed to cast long accusatory shadows across her paintings. Each brushstroke, each vibrant hue, suddenly felt exposed, laid bare under an invisible scrutiny. She walked slowly among them, touching the cool canvas of a particularly abstract piece, one she had poured her most raw emotions into. He had called her work audacious. The word resonated, a complex chord striking both pride and a fresh wave of trepidation. Had he truly seen the audacity, the quiet rebellion hidden beneath the layers of paint, or had he merely glimpsed a surface truth? The gallery, usually her sanctuary, now felt different, imbued with the lingering ghost of his presence. His scent, faint but distinct, a subtle blend of old paper and something earthy, like rain on dry soil, seemed to cling to the air. It was an olfactory whisper, a reminder of the disruption he had brought, and the questions he had unbiddenly ignited. She found herself replaying their brief interaction, dissecting his tone, the slight crinkle at the corner of his eyes when he spoke, the way his gaze had lingered on her. Each detail was a clue, a piece of a puzzle she hadn't realized she was meant to solve. The predictability of her life, once a comfort, now felt like a cage, and the bars seemed to shimmer with the faint, unsettling reflection of a path less chosen. The following days were a blur of curated art and absent-mindedness. Amelia rearranged a still life of porcelain vases for the third time, her mind elsewhere, retracing the lines of his silhouette against the gallery's sun-drenched windows. She found herself subconsciously scanning faces in the street, an unfamiliar habit, a restless energy stirring within her. The quiet hum of her carefully constructed existence had been pierced, and the wound, though small, refused to close. The fear of vulnerability, once a distant echo, now pressed against her like a tangible weight. To be truly seen, to have the hidden corners of her artistic soul illuminated by another, was a terrifying prospect. It meant risking judgment, misunderstanding, or worse, an intimacy she hadn't dared to crave. Yet beneath the fear, a nascent curiosity bloomed, an insistent whisper urging her to explore the uncharted territory his presence had revealed. One afternoon, a week after his visit, a small package arrived at the gallery. It was wrapped in plain brown paper, tied with a simple twine. Her heart gave a peculiar lurch as she saw the familiar, elegant script on the label, her own address, penned with a confident flourish. There was no return address, no sender's name. Inside, nestled amongst tissue paper, was a single perfectly preserved pressed violet, its deep purple petals still vibrant. Tucked beneath it, a small unmarked journal, its leather cover worn smooth with age, beckoned silently. No note, no explanation, just this enigmatic offering. The predictable rhythm of her life had not merely been disrupted, it had been irrevocably altered. Amelia ran a thumb over the journal's supple cover, the faint scent of old paper and something subtly floral clinging to it. The violet, a startling splash of color against the stark white tissue, seemed to pulse with a hidden meaning she couldn't quite decipher. Who was this man? This silent observer who saw her audacious work and then left such an intimately personal, yet utterly anonymous gift? The question swirled, thick and insistent, pushing aside the carefully constructed walls of her predictable world. She left the package on her desk, the violet lying beside the journal like a silent challenge. For the rest of the day, her gaze kept drifting to it, a magnetic pull that distracted her from sales figures and inventory checks. Each time a client entered the gallery, she found herself scanning their face, half expecting to see his intense eyes, to find some clue in their demeanor. But no one else looked at her with such profound understanding, or disturbed her peace with such an unsettling grace. That evening, back in the quiet sanctuary of her apartment, Amelia finally picked up the journal. Its pages were blank, waiting. It wasn't a book to read, but an invitation to write, to fill the emptiness with her own thoughts, her own audacious spirit. The realization sent a shiver down her spine. He hadn't just seen her art, he had seen her, and offered her a space to be even more of herself. The fear of vulnerability resurfaced, a cold tide against the warmth of curiosity. What if she wrote, and he somehow read it? What if she revealed too much, and he found it wanting? Yet the urge to respond, to engage with this silent dialogue he had initiated, was too strong to ignore. She traced the delicate veins of the pressed violet, its resilience a quiet testament to enduring beauty. It felt like a promise, an unspoken pact. And Amelia, for the first time in a long time, felt a dangerous, thrilling urge to break free from the constraints of her carefully curated existence. The next morning, the gallery felt different. The familiar scent of canvas and old wood seemed tinged with a new, almost electric possibility. Amelia moved through the space with a heightened awareness, her gaze lingering on each painting, each sculpture, as if seeing them for the first time through different eyes. Was her art truly audacious, as he had suggested? Or was it merely a reflection of the quiet rebellion she had always suppressed, a rebellion now stirring beneath the surface? She found herself sketching in her small office, not the precise, detailed studies she usually favored, but sweeping, abstract lines that spoke of unbridled energy. Her hand moved almost independently, guided by an impulse she couldn't quite articulate. The image of his intense, unwavering gaze flickered in her mind, a silent challenge. He had seen past the carefully constructed facade of her routine, past the polite smiles and practiced answers, straight into the nascent wildness she kept hidden. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. For so long, her life had been a series of predictable brushstrokes, each day a carefully planned composition. This man, with his quiet intensity and profound observation, was a splash of vibrant, unexpected color on her carefully muted canvas. She wondered if he would return, if their silent dialogue would continue. And if he did, what would she say? What could she possibly offer to someone who seemed to possess an almost uncanny ability to see beyond the surface? The journal lay on her desk, a silent invitation, its blank pages humming with unspoken stories. She hadn't written in it yet, the fear of revealing too much still a potent deterrent. But the urge to fill those pages, to articulate the burgeoning chaos within her, grew stronger with each passing moment. The quiet hum of the gallery, usually a source of comfort, now felt like a prelude to something momentous, something she couldn't quite grasp, but instinctively knew would change everything. The following morning, the gallery felt different, imbued with a subtle tension she hadn't noticed before. The familiar scent of linen canvas and oil paint seemed charged, almost electric. Amelia moved through the space with a newfound restlessness, her gaze lingering on the empty spot where he had stood. She found herself rearranging a small sculpture, then straightening a framed print that was already perfectly aligned, her hand seeking an outlet for the nervous energy that coursed through her. The thought of him returning was a persistent hum beneath the surface of her day, a tentative melody that both beckoned and warned. She caught her reflection in the polished glass of a display case, a stranger staring back. Her eyes, usually so composed, held a flicker of something wild, something untamed. The carefully constructed facade of the self-assured gallerist felt fragile, threatened by a single resonant encounter. She knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that her carefully curated world was on the precipice of an unraveling. The journal, still untouched on her desk, seemed to mock her hesitation. Its blank pages were no longer an empty void, but a gaping chasm demanding to be filled, to bear witness to the tumultuous landscape of her awakening heart. She picked up a charcoal stick, its rough texture a comfort in her trembling fingers, and approached a fresh canvas. But the image that emerged was not one of her usual ethereal landscapes. Instead, it was a blurred impression of intense, dark eyes, a face etched with a quiet, profound knowing. The lines were tentative at first, then bolder, driven by an impulse she couldn't control. It was a portrait of a stranger, yet it felt like a self-portrait, revealing a part of herself she hadn't known existed. The act of creation, usually a sanctuary, now felt like a desperate plea, a nascent language for a feeling that defied words. The charcoal dust smudged her fingertips, a tangible reminder of the raw emotion she'd poured onto the canvas. She stepped back, her gaze sweeping over the nascent portrait. It was unfinished, yet undeniably him, the intensity of his eyes, the subtle curve of his mouth that hinted at an unspoken smile. This wasn't just a likeness. It was an echo of the tremor he'd sent through her carefully constructed world. The silence of the gallery, usually a balm, now felt charged, expectant. A shiver traced its way down her spine, not of cold, but of a burgeoning awareness. She had always prided herself on her self-possession, her ability to navigate life with a quiet grace, her emotions neatly compartmentalized. But this man, with his observant gaze and resonant voice, had breached those defenses with an ease that was both alarming and exhilarating. The fear of vulnerability, a constant companion she had skillfully kept at bay, now pulsed beneath her skin, mingling with a strange, intoxicating curiosity. She looked at the journal again, then back at the portrait. The two seemed inextricably linked now, the canvas an outward manifestation of the internal revolution stirring within her, the journal a silent invitation to chronicle its unfolding. Amelia ran a hand through her hair, a gesture of exasperation mixed with a burgeoning excitement. Her routine, once a comforting rhythm, now felt like a cage, its bars suddenly visible. She craved the unknown, the unpredictable, the very things she had always meticulously avoided. The portrait, a silent testament to her burgeoning desire, seemed to demand a name, a conversation, a connection beyond the fleeting encounters in her gallery. She found herself wondering about him, about the life he led, the stories his eyes held. The art world, her sanctuary for so long, had become a conduit for something far more personal, far more unsettling, and undeniably, irrevocably alluring. The late afternoon sun, usually a welcome golden wash across the gallery's polished floors, now felt like an unwelcome spotlight, illuminating the restlessness that had taken root within her. The silence of the empty space, once a balm, now buzzed with unspoken questions. Who was this man who had so effortlessly, so quietly, dismantled the careful architecture of her days? She knew nothing of him beyond the intensity of his gaze, the low timbre of his voice, and that single potent word, audacious. Yet, in that void of information, her imagination began to construct intricate narratives, each more improbable than the last, all orbiting the singular fact that he had seen her, truly seen her, in a way no one else had in years. She walked to the large window overlooking the bustling street, a familiar escape route for her thoughts. The city outside, A tapestry of hurried lives and endless demands usually offered a sense of comforting anonymity. But today, it felt distant, a backdrop to her own internal drama. A young couple walked by, hand in hand, their laughter carrying faintly on the breeze. Amelia watched them, a pang of something akin to longing, yet not quite, stirring within her. It wasn't the romance she envied, but the effortless connection, the shared universe. Her own universe, meticulously curated and largely solitary, suddenly felt incomplete, a canvas awaiting a missing brushstroke. The memory of his eyes, dark and fathomless, returned with a surprising vividness. They held a wisdom, a quiet understanding that bypassed all pretenses. He hadn't just looked at her paintings. He had looked into them, and by extension, into her. It was a terrifying intimacy, a vulnerability she hadn't anticipated and certainly hadn't invited. Yet the fear was intertwined with an undeniable thrill, a sense of being on the precipice of something significant. The gallery, her safe haven, now felt like the launching pad for an uncertain journey. The following morning, the gallery felt different. The usual quiet hum of the city filtering through the tall windows seemed louder, more insistent. Amelia found herself pacing, her gaze drifting over the familiar canvases, searching for something she couldn't quite name. Each brushstroke, once a testament to her steadfast control, now felt imbued with a new, unsettling energy. Had he truly seen the audacity she poured into them, the quiet rebellion against the mundane that she so carefully veiled? She ran a hand over the cool, textured surface of a large, abstract piece, a swirl of deep blues and fiery oranges. It was a piece she often considered her most personal, a chaotic symphony of emotions she rarely allowed to surface. His single word, audacious, had stripped away the layers of interpretation she offered to others, leaving only the raw truth. It was exhilarating, yes, but also profoundly unsettling. It was as if he had peeled back a part of her soul, not with aggression, but with a gentle, knowing touch. Throughout the day, clients came and went, their polite inquiries and casual observations about her art feeling hollow, almost performative. Amelia responded with practiced grace, but her mind kept replaying the scene from yesterday, the way the light had caught his dark hair, the subtle curve of his lips when he spoke, the depth in his eyes that seemed to hold ancient secrets. She found herself glancing towards the gallery's entrance more often than usual, a subconscious anticipation fluttering in her chest. It was a foolish hope, she knew. People like him, people who saw so deeply, rarely lingered. They were comets, burning brightly across her carefully constructed sky, and then vanishing without a trace. Yet the possibility, however faint, was enough to keep her on edge, a taut string vibrating with unspoken longing. The afternoon light, usually a comforting presence in the gallery, now seemed to mock her, casting long, empty shadows that stretched across the polished floor. Each tick of the antique grandfather clock in the corner resonated with a hollow echo, amplifying the silence that pressed in around her. She tried to immerse herself in her work, sketching designs for a new commission, but her hand felt unsteady, her lines hesitant. The vibrant colors that usually flowed effortlessly from her brush now seemed dull, lifeless. Her focus was fractured, her thoughts constantly drifting back to the man, his words, and the unsettling clarity of his gaze. The fear of vulnerability he had ignited was a new sensation, a raw nerve exposed. Amelia had always prided herself on her self-sufficiency, her carefully cultivated independence. Her art was her sanctuary, a place where she could express the depths of her soul without judgment. But his observation, audacious, had stripped away that protective layer, revealing a yearning she hadn't known she possessed. It was a terrifying realization, this sudden awareness of a part of herself that craved to be seen, truly seen, not just by her art, but by another person. The thought alone sent a shiver down her spine, a strange mix of dread and exhilarating anticipation. She knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and frightened her, that her carefully constructed world was teetering on the precipice of change, and she was powerless to stop it. The gallery, usually a haven of quiet contemplation, now felt charged with an almost unbearable tension. Every shadow seemed to hold the echo of his presence, every patch of sunlight a reminder of the way it had illuminated his dark hair. Amelia found herself pacing, her usual measured steps replaced by an agitated wander. She rearranged a sculpture that didn't need rearranging, adjusted a painting that was perfectly aligned. Her hands trembled slightly, betraying the calm facade she usually maintained. She tried to dismiss him, to categorize him as just another patron, albeit a singularly perceptive one. But his words, not just the audacious, but the quiet way he had delivered them, had burrowed deep. It wasn't flattery, not the generic praise she often received. It was an understanding, an almost intrusive insight into the very core of her artistic intent. He had seen past the brushstrokes, beyond the composition, to the raw, untamed spirit she poured into her work, and in doing so, he had seen her. The gallery phone rang, a jarring interruption to her internal monologue. She answered it mechanically, her mind still replaying the scene. It was a familiar voice, a client inquiring about a piece. Amelia offered polite, professional responses, but her attention was fragmented. She found herself glancing towards the entrance, a flicker of illogical hope igniting with each faint sound from the street. He wouldn't come back today, she told herself. He couldn't. Yet, the possibility, however remote, clung to her, a persistent, unsettling hum beneath the surface of her carefully constructed composure. The thought of him returning both terrified and inexplicably thrilled her, a dangerous tightrope walk between the desire for connection and the ingrained fear of exposure. The client's voice faded into a polite farewell, and Amelia replaced the receiver with a sigh that was more tremor than release. The silence that followed was no longer comfortable. It was charged, a vacuum waiting to be filled by the echo of his words. Audacious. The word resonated, a testament to his perception, a stark contrast to the bland compliments she usually received. Most saw beauty, some saw technique, but he had seen the daring, the challenge she flung at the canvas, the very audacity of her soul laid bare. She walked slowly through the gallery, her fingers trailing over the cool, smooth surfaces of pedestals, her eyes unfocused on the vibrant art around her. Each piece, once a proud declaration of her vision, now felt like a confessional. Had she been too transparent? Had she revealed too much? A prickle of unease, sharp and unfamiliar, began to spread through her. Her art was her sanctuary, a place where she could be unapologetically herself without judgment. But his gaze, so direct and discerning, had transformed that sanctuary into something akin to an exhibition, not just of her work, but of her innermost self. The afternoon light began to soften, painting the gallery in hues of gold and rose. Amelia usually cherished this time, the quiet descent into evening, a peaceful transition. Today, however, it felt weighted, heavy with anticipation and a strange, burgeoning anxiety. She busied herself with trivial tasks, dusting a frame here, straightening a label there, anything to quell the restless energy that had taken root within her. She knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and unnerved her, that her predictable life, the one she had meticulously crafted and guarded, had just taken an irreversible turn. The man, with his quiet intensity and his singular word, had opened a door she hadn't even realized was there, and now she couldn't unknow its existence. The gallery, once a fortress of her solitude, now felt permeable, exposed. She longed for the familiar comfort of closing time, when the click of the lock would herald the return of her private world. Yet, an insistent part of her wished for him to reappear, to materialize from the gathering shadows and offer another glimpse into the depths of his enigmatic presence. It was a dangerous wish, she knew, one that threatened to unravel the carefully woven fabric of her existence. That night, sleep offered no refuge. Her dreams were a kaleidoscope of his piercing eyes, his shadowed profile, and the resonant echo of his single potent word: audacious. She woke with a jolt, the word still lingering on her lips, a taste of rebellion and revelation. The next morning, the gallery, usually a source of quiet joy, felt charged with an unfamiliar tension. Every chime of the bell above the door sent a jolt through her, a mixture of dread and longing. She meticulously arranged a new display, her hands moving with practiced precision, but her mind was a whirlwind of unanswered questions. Who was he? What did he truly see when he looked at her art, at her? Days bled into a week, each one carrying the lingering scent of his absence. The initial anxiety had mellowed into a persistent, almost melancholic yearning. She found herself subconsciously scanning the faces of passers-by, her gaze lingering on men who possessed a similar air of quiet contemplation, only to be met with disappointment. Her routines, once a source of comfort, now felt hollow, punctuated by the unspoken expectation of his return. The predictability she had once embraced now felt like a cage, its bars visible only after his brief, shattering intrusion. She began to wonder if his visit had been merely a fleeting moment of connection, a solitary spark that had illuminated a void she hadn't known existed. The thought was both liberating and terrifying. Then on a Tuesday, as the afternoon sun cast long golden streaks across the polished gallery floor, he reappeared. Amelia was dusting a particularly intricate bronze sculpture, her back to the entrance, when the subtle shift in the room's energy, rather than any sound, announced his presence. Her heart, a creature of habit, skipped its usual rhythm, then began a frantic, insistent drum. She turned slowly, the dust cloth still clutched in her hand, to find him standing just inside the threshold, his dark eyes fixed on her. He wore the same understated charcoal suit, a silent uniform of elegant mystery. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips, a flicker of acknowledgement that sent a shiver down her spine. He didn't speak, not immediately. He simply stood there, absorbing the space, allowing his gaze to drift over the canvases and sculptures, before returning to her, a silent question in their depths. The silence stretched, thick and potent, filled with unvoiced expectations and the fragile hope that had taken root in Amelia's chest. It was a silence that spoke volumes, a language understood beyond words. She felt a blush creep up her neck, a sensation she hadn't experienced since adolescence, and she instinctively tightened her grip on the dust cloth. The predictability of her life, once a cage, now felt like a distant, forgotten memory. This man, with his quiet intensity, had not just illuminated a void, he had carved a new path, an exhilarating, terrifying unknown. Then, a voice, deep and resonant, cut through the quiet hum of the gallery, a sound that seemed to vibrate in the very air around them. "Your work," he began, his eyes still holding hers, "it possesses a singular audacity." The words hung in the air, a delicate challenge. Amelia's breath hitched. Audacity. It was a word she had never dared to apply to her own creations, always preferring terms like expressive or introspective. But audacity. It felt like he had peered directly into the deepest, most vulnerable part of her artistic soul and named the thing she most feared and most desired to be seen. A flicker of alarm, sharp and cold, shot through her, quickly followed by an unfamiliar warmth. He saw her, truly saw her, in a way no one else ever had. Yet this profound recognition also brought with it a profound fear. To be so completely understood, so utterly exposed, felt like standing naked in a spotlight, every flaw and every hidden truth laid bare. The dust cloth slipped from her fingers, landing softly on the polished concrete floor, a small sound in the vast quiet. He didn't flinch, his gaze unwavering, as if he had anticipated the small telling drop. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken observations, with the weight of his perception. Amelia felt a blush creep up her neck, a telltale flush she despised for its transparency. She wanted to retrieve the cloth, to bend down, to break the spell, but her limbs felt rooted. Instead, she found herself responding, her voice a little breathy, a little too soft. Audacity, she echoed, testing the word on her tongue, trying to infuse it with a casualness she didn't feel. I suppose some might call it that. She watched his lips quirk, just slightly, a hint of a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, which remained intensely focused on her. "And you?" he finally asked, his voice a low timbre that resonated through the quiet gallery. "What do you call it, Amelia?" The use of her first name, unbidden and yet utterly natural, sent another jolt through her. It was a familiarity he hadn't earned, yet it felt strangely right, as if he had always known it, always known her. Her mind raced, searching for an answer that would protect her, that would reestablish the comfortable distance she usually maintained. But the words wouldn't come. All her carefully constructed defenses seemed to crumble under the weight of his unwavering attention. He wasn't just looking at her art. He was looking at her. And in that moment, she understood the true meaning of vulnerability. The warmth settled deeper, a dangerous, exhilarating heat that promised both revelation and inevitable pain. Her gaze flickered from his steady eyes to the canvas beside her, a vibrant chaos of crimson and gold that usually offered solace. Now it felt like an exposed nerve ending. I call it necessary," she finally whispered, the word barely audible, a confession wrenched from a place she rarely dared to visit. It was a truth she had always kept hidden, even from herself, cloaked in the more acceptable terms of passion or expression. To admit its necessity was to admit a profound, aching void it filled. A silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken observations. He didn't press, didn't offer an immediate response. Instead, his eyes, those unnervingly perceptive eyes, seemed to soften, losing a fraction of their intense scrutiny. It was a subtle shift, yet Amelia felt its impact, like the sudden easing of a tight band around her chest. He simply nodded, a slow, deliberate gesture that conveyed an understanding far deeper than any spoken affirmation could have. "Necessary," he repeated, the word a soft echo of her own, imbued with a weight she hadn't realized it possessed. He then turned his attention back to the painting, his gaze sweeping over the impasto strokes, the deliberate layers of color. "And this necessity," he continued, his voice now a thoughtful murmur, "does it ever feel like a burden?" The question caught her off guard. A burden? It was everything, the very air she breathed, the pulse in her veins. To consider it a burden felt like a betrayal. Yet, as she contemplated his words, a flicker of recognition sparked within her. The relentless drive, the late nights, the constant striving for something just beyond her grasp. Yes, there were moments when it felt overwhelmingly heavy. Sometimes, she admitted, the single word escaping before she could filter it, like a relentless tide. She almost winced, revealing too much, too soon. But his presence, strangely, created an environment where such naked honesty felt less like a risk and more like an inevitability. He moved then, a slow, unhurried step closer to the canvas, his hand reaching out, not quite touching, but hovering inches from the surface. "A tide," he mused, his fingers tracing the invisible contours of the paint. "That pulls you out, or washes you ashore?" His question hung in the air, a delicate challenge, inviting her to delve deeper into the turbulent waters of her own creative soul. Amelia watched his hand, mesmerized by its proximity to her work, by the silent, almost reverent gesture. The question, too, resonated with a disquieting truth. Was it a current that dragged her under, or one that deposited her, renewed, on solid ground? She had never truly articulated it, not even to herself. The act of creation was simply an act, a compulsion. Both, perhaps, she finally whispered, her voice barely audible above the quiet hum of the gallery. Her gaze lifted from his hand to his face, seeking an answer to a question she hadn't yet formed. He met her eyes, and in their depths, she saw not judgment, but a profound understanding that unnerved her further. It was as if he held a mirror to her soul, reflecting back facets she had meticulously hidden, even from herself. He lowered his hand, turning his full attention to her. "And which do you prefer, Amelia? To be pulled out, or to be returned?" His voice was a low murmur, yet each word carried an undeniable weight, a gentle insistence that demanded an answer, not just from her lips, but from the deepest chambers of her being. The question was not about art anymore, not really. It was about choice, about surrender, about the very essence of her existence. The terror and the exhilaration warred within her, a dizzying dance on the precipice of discovery. Amelia's breath hitched, a silent battle raging behind her composed facade. The scent of aged paper and faint linseed oil, usually comforting, now seemed to press in on her, amplifying the intensity of the moment. She felt exposed, stripped bare not by a physical act, but by the sheer force of his perception. Her carefully cultivated walls, built over years of quiet self-preservation, crumbled under his gaze, revealing a landscape she had long considered barren. "Returned," she managed to articulate, the word feeling foreign on her tongue, heavy with unspoken implications. It was an admission, a reluctant surrender to the familiar comfort of her solitude, even if that comfort had begun to feel like a cage. Yet even as she spoke, a rebellious spark ignited within her, a flicker of defiance against the very answer she'd given. The pull towards the unknown, towards the terrifying exhilaration he offered, was a siren song she found increasingly difficult to resist. He offered a slow, almost imperceptible nod, his eyes never leaving hers. "A safe choice," he observed, his tone devoid of judgment, yet laced with an undercurrent of something she couldn't quite decipher. Perhaps disappointment, perhaps simply a recognition of her truth. He took a subtle step closer, and the air around them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken possibilities. "But safety," he continued, his voice softer now, a conspiratorial whisper, "can sometimes be the most profound act of self-denial. Can it not?" His words, like a surgeon's precise incision, cut through her last vestiges of composure. He wasn't merely questioning her answer. He was questioning her entire existence, the foundation upon which she had built her life. The terror that had simmered within her now flared, hot and sharp, but it was inextricably linked with an intoxicating rush. He was offering her a key, a chance to unlock doors she hadn't even realized were closed. The choice was stark: remain in the familiar shadows, or step into the searing, glorious light he seemed to emanate. Amelia's breath hitched, a silent gasp trapped in her throat. The gallery, usually a sanctuary of measured silence, now buzzed with an electric tension that hummed between them. His eyes, dark and fathomless, held hers captive, reflecting a nascent understanding she hadn't known she craved. He didn't wait for an answer, perhaps knowing she had none ready, or perhaps understanding that the question itself was the beginning of her response. Instead, he reached into the inner pocket of his finely tailored jacket, retrieving a small, intricately carved wooden box. The box, dark and polished, felt ancient, imbued with secrets. He held it out to her, a gesture that was both offering and challenge. "This is for you, Amelia," he said, his voice a low timbre that resonated within her, a melody both unsettling and profoundly beautiful. "A small token. Consider it a continuation of our conversation." Her fingers trembled as she accepted the box. Its weight was surprisingly substantial, and the wood felt smooth and cool beneath her touch. She looked from the box to his face, a silent question in her eyes. What was this? Another riddle? Another thread in the intricate web he was weaving around her? He simply offered a faint, almost imperceptible smile, a curve of his lips that hinted at depths she couldn't yet fathom. Then, with a graceful nod that was both final and promising, he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing softly in the hushed space, leaving her alone once more, clutching the mysterious box, her carefully constructed world now irrevocably altered, teetering on the precipice of an unknown, exhilarating future. Amelia stood rooted to the spot, the polished wooden box a strange anchor in her trembling hands. The scent of cedar, faint but distinct, rose from it, mingling with the lingering impression of his presence. She traced the smooth grain with her thumb, her mind a whirlwind of questions and nascent desires. He called it a continuation of our conversation, yet their exchange had been so brief, so utterly elliptical. What conversation? The one etched, not in words, but in the searing intensity of his gaze, in the audacious pronouncement that had stripped her bare? She felt a strange compulsion to open it, yet a deeper, more primal fear held her back. This wasn't merely a gift. It was a proposition, a silent dare. He wasn't simply offering an object. He was offering a different path, a divergence from the well-worn grooves of her existence. The gallery, usually a sanctuary of order and predictable beauty, now felt stifling, its familiar canvases suddenly less vibrant, less compelling than the enigma clutched in her hands. Finally, with a deep breath that did little to calm her racing heart, she carried the box to her small, meticulously organized office at the back of the gallery. She placed it on her desk, its dark wood stark against the pale oak. Her fingers hovered over the lid, a moment of profound hesitation. What if opening it irrevocably changed everything? What if it confirmed the terrifying notion that she was indeed seen, truly seen, in a way she had never allowed herself to be before? With a decisive, almost defiant motion, she lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of dark velvet, lay a single, exquisitely crafted fountain pen. Its barrel was a deep, lustrous aubergine, tipped with what appeared to be gold. It wasn't merely beautiful. It exuded an air of purpose, of inherent power. Beside it, tucked beneath a silk ribbon, was a small folded card. Her name, Amelia, was written on it in elegant, flowing script. His script, she knew instinctively. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she unfolded the card. There was only one word, written with the same deliberate grace: right. The word, stark and imperative, seemed to vibrate in the quiet air of her office. Right. It wasn't a suggestion, but a command, delivered with the quiet authority that had already begun to dismantle her carefully constructed world. Amelia's fingers, trembling slightly, traced the elegant curves of the calligraphy, the ink a rich, almost black hue against the cream paper. The pen, heavy and cool in her hand, felt like a promise and a burden all at once. It was an instrument designed for creation, for the articulation of thought, for the very act of revealing, and he wanted her to use it. She looked from the pen to the blank journal he had sent days earlier, still pristine and untouched on her bedside table at home. That journal, once an object of perplexing curiosity, now seemed to hum with an unspoken expectation. He hadn't asked her to paint, to draw, to sculpt, mediums through which she routinely expressed herself, albeit in ways that often felt veiled, protected. He asked her to write, to commit words to paper, to expose the inner landscape that even her most audacious paintings only hinted at. A wave of fear, cold and bracing, washed over her. Writing felt far more intimate, far more vulnerable than any visual art. It stripped away the layers of interpretation, the ambiguity of form and color. Words were precise, direct. They laid bare the soul. Yet beneath the fear, a flicker of something else ignited, a dangerous curiosity, an insistent whisper that perhaps this was exactly what she needed. To be seen, truly seen, not just through the lens of her art, but through the raw, unfiltered truth of her own thoughts. She closed the box. The fountain pen nestled once more on its velvet bed, its silent command echoing in her mind. The gallery, usually a sanctuary of controlled beauty, now felt like a stage, its familiar walls suddenly too thin. She needed to be alone, to grapple with this unprecedented challenge, this unsettling invitation to self-discovery. Her gaze drifted to the window, where the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone street. The world outside, once a predictable backdrop to her insulated existence, now seemed to pulse with a new, urgent rhythm, an anticipation she couldn't quite name. The rhythm of the city, once a comforting hum, now throbbed with a disquieting insistence. Amelia felt an unfamiliar tremor in her hands as she locked the gallery door, the click echoing with an unsettling finality. The thought of returning to her quiet apartment, to the familiar scent of oil paint and turpentine, offered no solace. The sanctuary she had meticulously built around herself felt porous, permeable. His gaze, those unsettlingly perceptive eyes, had cracked the facade. She walked, not towards home, but aimlessly, the cobblestones a blur beneath her worn boots. The air, usually crisp and invigorating, felt heavy, charged with unspoken questions. Audacious. The word ricocheted in her mind, a relentless echo. It wasn't merely a description of her art. It was a challenge, a dare. He had seen the raw, untamed spirit she tried so hard to cage within the precise lines and muted tones of her landscapes. He had seen the nascent fire, the audacious yearning for something more than controlled beauty. A small, dimly lit cafe, usually overlooked, beckoned with its promise of anonymity. She ordered a black coffee, its bitter warmth a sharp contrast to the turmoil within her. The steam curled around her face, momentarily obscuring the world, offering a brief respite. But even here, in this quiet corner, his presence lingered. The weight of the untouched journal, the delicate pressed violet, felt palpable, a silent promise of an uncharted territory. What did he expect? What did he want her to write? The blank pages of the journal seemed to mock her, a vast expanse mirroring the emptiness she suddenly felt when contemplating her own inner landscape. She, who could translate the fleeting beauty of light on water into a tangible form, now found herself utterly bereft of words for her own soul. This man, this stranger, had not just seen her art, he had seen her, stripped bare of her carefully constructed defenses, and the revelation was both terrifying and exhilarating. The coffee grew cold, forgotten, as Amelia stared into the murky depths, a new, unsettling question taking root. Was she truly audacious enough to answer his unspoken invitation? The weight of the antique fountain pen in Amelia's palm was both a comfort and a torment. Its cool, smooth brass, etched with a swirling, forgotten monogram, felt like a miniature anchor, tethering her to the precipice of a decision. "Right," he had said, his voice a low, resonant hum that still vibrated in the quiet corners of her gallery. echoing the audacity he had found in her art, in her very soul. She traced the contours of the blank journal, its cream-colored pages an intimidating expanse. It wasn't merely a book. It was a void, waiting to be filled with the raw, untamed parts of herself she had so meticulously hidden. The pressed violet, fragile and profound, lay nestled within its first page, a silent, fragrant witness to the burgeoning storm within her. For years, her life had been a meticulously curated exhibition of predictability. Each day a brushstroke of routine, each emotion a carefully chosen hue. Her art, too, had been a controlled explosion, passion tempered by precision, audacity veiled by technique. But he, with his piercing gaze and unsettling insight, had seen beyond the frame, into the chaotic heart of the artist. He had not just questioned her art, he had questioned her life, her choice of safety, peeling back layers she hadn't even realized she possessed. The fear, sharp and cold, was a familiar companion. It whispered of the comfort of the known, the quiet dignity of her solitary existence. It painted vivid pictures of ridicule, of vulnerability laid bare for a world that might not understand, might not care. But intertwined with this fear was a burgeoning exhilaration, a fierce, almost primal urge to break free. It was the thrill of standing at the edge of a cliff, the wind whipping through her hair, the vast unknown stretching out before her. She looked at the pen again, then at the blank page. The choice was stark, brutal in its clarity. She could retreat, fold herself back into the safe, predictable canvas of her past, allowing the dust of routine to settle once more over her vibrant spirit. Or she could pick up the pen, let its ink bleed onto the page, and embark on a terrifying, exhilarating journey into the uncharted territory of her own making. With a shaky breath, Amelia uncapped the fountain pen. The subtle scent of ink filled the air, a promise of stories yet untold. She closed her eyes, picturing his intense gaze, his knowing smile. Then, with a surge of defiant courage, she pressed the nib to the first virgin page of the journal. The first word, unbidden and raw, began to form, a testament to the audacious journey she was finally, irrevocably, choosing to begin.